I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. I want to talk about the Prisoner Review Board and kind of the history behind what's going on there. The recent tragic killing of an 11-year-old boy is not the beginning of the issues at the Prisoner Review Board. Last week, Governor Pritzker said he's working to make changes at the PRB, but the truth is, this is 100% a situation Governor Pritzker created. Honestly, I shudder to think what would be happening on the streets of Illinois if the PRB would look like today, what it looked like the last 3 or 4 years under this governor. If we hadn't called attention to what was happening over the last few years, the situation would be much worse. Under 3 prior governors, 2 Democrats and 1 Republican, the PRB voted far less often to release individuals, including convicted murderers. Statistically speaking, Governor Pritzker's PRB is more than twice as likely to release someone from prison. We're talking about people like the notorious Starved Rock killer, people like Paula Sims, multiple cop killers, child molesters, rapists. At one point, even Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx said she was concerned by the releases taking place from the Prisoner Review Board. What changed under Governor Pritzker compared to prior administrations? The answer seems clear. He worked hard to remake the PRB to something that fit his political views, his philosophy on criminal justice. I don't know how else you justify appointing a convicted double murderer to serve on the board. Governor Pritzker played games with appointments. He pulled nominees before deadlines for confirmation and then reappointed them, ensuring that they could continue to cast votes and serve on the Prisoner Review Board without Senate oversight. Now we are here once again talking about the PRB after they released a man who had orders of protection against him so that he could go out and less than 24 hours later tried to kill a pregnant woman that needed protection, and instead killing her son when the child tried bravely to defend his mother. If you can't see the need for reform here, you're just not looking. This is why we're here once again to introduce legislation to finally undo the damage Governor J.B. Pritzker's administration has done to the Prisoner Review Board and to make the streets of Illinois safer for our families and communities. With that, I'd like to turn it over to State Senator Steve McClure.
Thank you, Senator Plummer. 1 in 4 women aged 18 and older in the United States have been the victim of severe physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. And most female victims of intimate partner violence were previously victimized by the same offender. In fact, 77% of women aged 18 to 24 were previously victimized. 76% of women ages 25 to 34 were previously victimized, and 81% of women ages 35 to 49 were previously victimized. This case is a tragic example of an all too common problem in this country, and it's a clear demonstration of how dangerous these situations are. Grissetti Brand had previous convictions for home invasion, causing injury, and violation of an order of protection. Not long after being released on parole, he threatened Lateria Smith and went to her home, despite it being a violation of his parole and the order of protection that was in place against him. Violating that order of protection was a red flag that should not have been missed. I'm preparing to file legislation that would increase the penalty for violating an order of protection and ensuring that this crime, which in this case was a clear indication of escalating violence toward this family, is treated with the seriousness it deserves. My legislation would increase the penalty for violating an order of protection, and a first-time violation would increase from a misdemeanor to a Class 4 felony. And if someone violates again, that conviction would increase it from a Class 4 felony to a Class 3 felony. A Class 3 felony is a much more serious felony than a Class 4 felony, and it would demonstrate the seriousness of the offense. And I think most prosecutors would agree that a simple misdemeanor is not severe enough for someone who's violating such a serious order from the court. And with that, I will turn it over to Leader John Kern.
Thank you, Senator McClure. I want to start by expressing my sincere condolences to the family of Jaden Perkins, especially to his mother, Lateria Smith, who has suffered an unimaginable loss. No parent should suffer the loss of a child. let alone in the circumstances around Jaden's death here are just horrific. This never should have happened. Many areas of our criminal justice system failed Ms. Smith and Jaden. But at the end of the day, it was the Governor Pritzker's Prison Review Board that released Cressetti Brand, despite overwhelming evidence he was dangerous to this family. For years, we have called for serious overhaul of the PRB. And today we are taking a step forward in that process and introducing reforms that will put victims first, take politics out of the appointment process, and hold the board accountable for decisions. My legislation would put victims first by requiring the PRB to make every effort possible to immediately inform a victim when an inmate is being released. Whether it's early release, a commutation, or like in this situation, the outcome of a revocation hearing after an offender has violated the conditions of their parole, it is critical a victim knows that someone who could be a danger to them is out of prison. The devastating death of a child at the hands of a violent criminal with a pronounced history of domestic violence shows the critical need to better educate board members on the dangers, patterns, warning signs, and outcomes of domestic violence. My legislation requires all PRB board members to complete yearly training on domestic violence and sexual assault so they may better understand how these crimes impact the women and children who become victims. For too long, these $100,000 a year positions on the Prison Review Board have been given to political appointees who don't have the requisite experience to make these life and death decisions. We must take politics out of the appointment process to create a qualified board with a deep understanding of the criminal justice system. Under my legislation, members of the board would be required to have at least 20 cumulative years of experience working in the criminal justice system as a prosecutor, a criminal defense attorney, a judge, a probation officer, or a public defender. Finally, we must be able to hold members of the board accountable for the decisions they make. Currently, decisions about revocating parole, like in the case of Cressetti Brand, are made entirely in secret with only the outcome being known. My legislation would add critical transparency to these cases, requiring the board to provide a public written notice within 24 hours when a decision has been made to release. This notification would require not just any relevant notes about the information presented in the case, but also information about the board's deliberations and perhaps most importantly, the members' votes. This transparency is key to holding the board accountable for the decisions it makes. This legislation is an important step forward, but it's important we're clear that the Prison Review Board isn't the only entity under Governor Pritzker's control that failed Ms. Smith. The PRB voted to release Brand despite overwhelming evidence it already possessed that he was dangerous. But it was the Department of Corrections that gave him the green light despite knowing that Ms. Smith had sought an additional order of protection. The Department of Corrections was notified of Lataria Smith's attempt to get another order of protection on an emergency basis on February 22nd, 3 weeks before Brand brutally attacked Ms. Smith and killed her 11-year-old son, Jaden. Ms. Smith did everything possible to protect her family through the legal process. And let me repeat, she did everything she could. But the Department of Corrections failed to pass along this critical information to the Prison Review Board. Sadly, this is yet another example of mismanagement under an agency under Governor Pritzker's control. The governor always seems to find creative ways to deflect blame and abdicate his responsibility when something goes wrong. But he is in direct control of the Department of Corrections. And I would like to know how Governor Pritzker plans to address the failures at that agency. Honestly, there isn't a clearer life and death example of the need for him to focus on managing the agencies under his control.